I want to do a three-part series with you through Christmas, and Pastor Caleb's going to preach once this month, so you'll be blessed to get to listen to him preach as well. But I'm going to do a three-part series about who is Christ. And we're going to see Christ in the Old Testament today. You know, as I said in my prayer, Christ doesn't just appear in the manger. Like, ta-da! Christ is all eternal and pre-existent. He existed before the worlds began. He designed salvation along with the Father. He designed creation. He designed us. We are designed by God. And all you got to do is go to your doctor and go, how does this work? And they start to explain how it works. And the neat thing is, the God they worship often is the God of time plus chance. Because if you worship the God of time plus chance, viruses can be formed by accidents. There was just a big thing in the news this week that I read that they found on an asteroid a molecule that might look like it could be the beginning of life. So life was just floating around the universe until whammo bammo, it hit the planet Earth, and then ta-da! No, that's not how this works. So I first of all want to talk to you about the fact that Christ is present at creation. If you're taking notes with me in your bulletin, Christ is present at creation. A lot of times we honestly think, or it's kind of in our culture, that Christ happens in the manger. No, Christ is present at creation. Genesis chapter 1:1, we saw this earlier. In the beginning, we read this, God created the heavens and the earth. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Then we skip over a few verses and we get to verse 26. And here's what's interesting. Then God said, let us. He didn't say, I will. He didn't say, me will, like some little kids who say, me for, me will, me do this, me love you, daddy. It says, let us make man in our, plural, our image, according to our likeness. When you read this in the original Hebrew, these are all plural. And they're not the magisterium plural of Queen Elizabeth. The will of our king, it's not that kind of our. The magisterium of plural, that's not this. This is, then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female. He created them. If there's any text of Scripture that is more hated by modern people in education in Colorado, it's this text. They hate this text. Why? Because sexuality is not a construct that you get to pick. Sexuality was ordained in your life by God from the moment of conception in his mind. Before the worlds were made, it was created. It's not a construct that you get to pick and choose. And so what do? The way we rebel against God is to say, I refuse the way you made me. I refuse that. So God created man in his own image. What does that mean? So are we gods, like the Mormons say? Are we becoming a god through many reincarnations like the Hindus teach? No, what does that mean? That means that we're made in the moral likeness of God. We're made in his image. In other words, we know right from wrong. That's why Paul says in Romans 1, he can say, when they knew God, they didn't want anything to do with God, and God gave them up to do wicked things because they knew who he was. Every man born in the world knows there's a God. Nobody walked into this building today and said, wow, look at this beautiful building. Clearly, the simultaneous explosion in a wood, drywall, paint, metal factory. And yet you understand how the human body and the ecosystem of the universe is millions of times more complex than this building happening over millions of years by a big explosion. Nobody would believe that. That is, you have to be given over because you refuse to listen to God. Every man born in the world knows that there is a God. Every man born in the world knows that there's somebody bigger than them. So I'm going to have to say it honestly, from the time I was a kid, I love comic books. Okay, so I don't read comic books anymore, okay? When I became a man, I put away childish things, but I sure watched Thor as a movie, and Captain America, and the Fantastic Four, and I mean, I just think, do you understand that those are all man-made gods from Greek mythology and Roman mythology? Now, they're a lot of fun, and you can enjoy them. My wife goes, I can't believe, because it would be me, Brandon, and Dave watching the latest whatever movie, or when one came out a few years ago, we were in Arizona. No, they were here, and we went to the movie. And she goes, okay, if you guys all want to go out, we girls are going to go do something else. And it was like, wow, that was so cool. Oh, that was so neat. Oh, wow, we came home. Yeah, wow, that was neat. But you know that's all man's imagination of what God must look like based on who he is. So stop and think about the Greek gods and the Roman gods. They committed incest. They killed each other. They committed adultery. They fornicated. They were mean to each other and vindictive. The Roman gods and the Greek gods didn't want man to have fire, or else he would become too uppity. So they got mad when one of the gods gave fire to man, so man could warm himself in the cold winters. They were not self-sacrificial gods at all. What the Romans and the Greeks did is they looked at themselves and then looked at the sky and said, there must be somebody bigger than us out there. We will create God in our image. Now stop and think about it. Man commits adultery, man murders, man steals, man is vindictive, man is vengeful. Everything that Odin is, man is. Everything that Zeus is, man is. Everything the god Mars is. By the way, we'll stand on Mars Hill in Athens in a few months, where Paul preaches that great message, where he contradicts the 12 gods of Rome and the 12 gods of the Greeks who met on that mountain to decide what was going to go on with man. And they made a judgment about that on that rock. And Paul says in Acts, God will judge the world. He's standing on the rock where they believe the first 12 gods made judgments about the universe. And Paul says, on this rock, on this testimony that Jesus Christ is raised from the dead, God will judge every man by Christ, not by the 12 made-up gods that you have. When you understand Roman and Greek mythology and how important Mars Hill was in their whole ecosystem, Paul's standing there by himself proclaiming Jesus is Lord, and he came again from the dead, and he will judge man. It blew them. We don't get that, because if you don't understand Greek and Roman mythology and how important Mars Hill was, you don't even understand what's going on in that passage. Those gods were made in the image of man. Moses, writing 500, 800 years before the Greeks came up with their gods, said, God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. In other words, the Greeks, the Romans, created their gods in their image. God said, no, I made you in my image. And that's the difference between all paganism and biblical Christianity. It's who made you. I'm made in the image of God. I'm made in his moral likeness, so I know right from wrong very soon. I don't have to be taught right from wrong. I know murder is a sin. That's why we have so many women today that have mental issues, because inherently they know that when they have taken the life of their child in the womb, it causes them mental problems. Because every mother knows it's wrong to murder her child. Now, can murder be forgiven? 100%. Just like lying, stealing, taking the name of the Lord in vain, every sin can be forgiven. So when I say things like that, they say, don't you love mothers that maybe before Christ, or they were desperate and they did that? I said, of course I love them, but I need them to be broken over their sin and ask God's forgiveness, and God will restore them and forgive them, and all will be well with their soul. But taking more drugs to push off the memory of their sin will not help them. Any more than me not admitting I'm a sinner helps me. I'm made in the image of God. God isn't made in my image. When you talk to the Mormons, they will let you know that as man is, God once was. As God is, man may become. If you listen to Solomon Raju, our missionary in India, he will tell you about the reincarnation, over thousands of reincarnations. And that's why the Brahmin tend to be so arrogant in India, because they're one or two reincarnations away from being God. That's why they talk down to everybody. That's why they're condescending to everybody. That's why they're rude to everybody, because in the next reincarnation, they're going to be one of the 330 million Hindu gods. Christ in creation refutes all of those false theologies. And it puts us on a path where Christ becomes the creator, so therefore it's his board game. He makes the rules. I have to abide by his rules. So I play board games and card games with a 7-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 4-year-old. Now, I got to be honest, and not to be mean, okay, not to be mean, but my granddaughter hates to lose. I don't know where Ellie gets that from. It certainly couldn't be from me or her father, because we are so passive and we're not competitive at all, and we embrace losing. Yeah, no, there is not one Scotsman from southwestern Pennsylvania that has ever embraced losing, okay? So that is absolutely not true. So my granddaughter, is losing in Candyland. And I got to tell you, when you play Candyland with 7, 6, 5, and 4-year-olds, it is a cutthroat business. I mean, women and children need to watch out, because it is a cutthroat business. And when they land and have to go back, and there's a little trash talking from the 4-year-old, I mean, it is a cutthroat business, Candyland. And my granddaughter will change the rules when she's losing. Now, I'm not saying that all women change the rules when they're losing. Did I say the quiet powder out loud? Did I actually say that? Mo Elizabeth doesn't change the rules when she's losing, does she? Yeah, see, Mo, you're going to be good, Mo. Mo didn't even blink. I mean, he went like this immediately. It wasn't like he even paused to think about it. That is great. It's like, she comes home from having her hair done. You look fantastic. That just has to roll, guys, off of your lips. I mean, you can't even wait for her to ask, what do you think, right? My granddaughter loves to change the rules. So we were all playing Candyland, and she said, girls don't have to go backwards when they hit that slide. I talk about female privilege. Girls don't have to go backwards when they hit the slide to go back. Candyland is, you have to. Some of you don't know Candyland. Wow, you have not played the preeminent 5-year-old game recently, have you? Yeah, exactly. You don't get to change the rules because God made the rule book. Jesus is the creator. You don't get to say, well, I get to change the rules. No, Jesus made you the way you are. Now, that doesn't mean he wants you to stay the way you are. That's why Jesus, we'll get to that sermon. That's why Jesus came into the world, to save you from sin. But as far as when you say, well, I don't like this about me, and I don't like that about me, I don't like this about me, and God made a mistake. God didn't make a mistake. He made you in his moral likeness, and the chromosomes he wanted you to have are the chromosomes you have. Then God blessed them, And God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. So let me tell you, this contradicts every last environmentalist whack job. Now, I'm going to balance that by saying this doesn't mean we should abuse the planet. We are to be good stewards of the planet. But this also doesn't mean there's anybody like Mother Nature. Mother Nature is a fiction of Greek and Roman mythology that's just as equally heretical as anything else they taught about theology. Mother Nature is, as Václav Havel used to say, the great founder of the Hungarian Republic after the Cold War, he said, environmentalists are like watermelon. They're green on the outside, but red on the inside. And that's from Václav Havel, who knew a thing or two about communism. Then God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. Number one, be fruitful and multiply. It's God's call for us to have children. Are you listening to me? It is God's call for us to have children. Now, obviously, sometimes you can't have children. Sometimes there's no marriage in your future. There are reasons. But I have counseled women that have said to me, well, I'm not mentally stable. I remember many counseling sessions with one woman. She said, my member of our church married a guy in our church. I did the wedding ceremony. I did the premarital counseling. And she said, well, my dad was bipolar. And I'm afraid that if I have kids, they'll be bipolar. She desperately needed to have children because she was very narcissistic. She was very, very self-centered. She needed to have children to pour herself into somebody else and be a part of something bigger than just herself because she thought about herself all the time. All the time. Finally, after in and out of our church, I said to her husband one day, I said, you guys need to have kids. Long story short, she now is a mother with 2 kids. This was 20 years ago, and she's happy as a clam. We're Facebook friends. She sends me pictures of her kids. She said, Pastor, thank you for telling me to have children. This is the greatest thing in my life. I said, well, of course it is, because God made you to have children. Now, there are exceptions to that rule. But we live in a culture today when large percentages of our women don't want to have children at all. They don't want to have kids. That is a direct sin against God if there isn't another reason why you can't have children. If you are capable of having children and you are married, you should have children. Now, I was never so forthright about that in my early ministry, because of course I'll get people that will be mad at me, and you don't like that, but it wasn't where it is today. You look at the numbers of young women that never intend to have children and they are fully capable of having children. That is a direct sin, just like lying, cheating, or stealing. Because God says, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. God said, listen, have children, take dominion. That doesn't mean have children so you can abuse them or abuse the world by wrecking the world. No, we're to be good stewards of both of them. But God made us to have dominion and to have children. That's why God made us. So we could raise up a seed, children that would glorify and honor Him. Now, obviously, there are reasons why not. My daughter has had 3 miscarriages. I know what it's like to cry and cry and cry with your daughter that wishes to have children and she can't. I know what that's like. I know what it's like. My mom had 3 miscarriages. My brothers often asked me why I wasn't one of those. But God's plan for us is to have children. And I'm just telling you, when I was 25, I didn't preach like this. But when you look at the statistics of women that are 25 and 30 and they're married and they just are saying, I don't want to have children, I started seeing them in my office, Christian women telling me, I don't want to have children. There's never been another generation of Christian women that haven't wanted to have children. And there's a difference between can't have a child and I don't want a child. And those are 2 different things. Number two, Christ is present at the promise. Christ is present at the promise. Genesis chapter 3 and verse 10. So he said, I heard your voice in the garden. I heard your voice in the garden and was afraid, right? Because they've sinned now. Because I was naked and I hid myself. And he said, who told you that you were naked? I want you to notice something when dealing with children and people. Don't ask them why, especially children. So why did you throw the baseball through the window? Oh, yeah. And then you'll get a narrative where they blame a fictitious character. Well, the visible Casper the Friendly Ghost told me to throw the ball through the window. Notice that God never asks why. God says, what did you do and who told you? Because I was afraid, I was naked, I hid myself. And he said, who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree of which I commanded that you should not eat? He asked them a direct question. Then the man said, the woman! And every man ever since then has said the same thing. I'm just saying. The woman! But you notice it really wasn't the woman's fault in Adam's narrative? Isn't it amazing how we can come up with narratives why we're not responsible for what's gone wrong? My dad taught me, he said, Mike, always be a man and take responsibility. He said the key test of whether you're really a Christian man or not is that you take responsibility for your actions and the actions of those around you. We were building our $40 million campus. The economy was falling apart in Arizona. It was 08, 09. The real estate market was falling apart. People were being foreclosed on. And we were trying to build a $40 million campus. We had about $7.5 million in the bank from the sale of our property. And we needed to raise about $7 million and then borrow much of the rest. $40 million is today's appraisal. Back in those days, it was probably closer to 30. So we had a contractor, but we needed to do grading. We need to do grading. So the water slope would be right, and you know how that goes. It was a 14-acre piece of property, and all the buildings were laid out on where it was going to go, and you had to have these big. So anyway, we weren't going to get the general contractor because you had to pay him $10,000 a month to be the GC. So we weren't going to do that until we really needed him. And you only have one contractor sub doing all the grading. You really don't need, you're not juggling the electrician and the plumber and the drywaller and the painter. You're not juggling a bunch of subcontractors. So we were like, well, we can wait a couple of months before we start spending that money. It's going to save money. So anyway, one day my business manager came into me and he said, Pastor, I think I need to confess there's a problem. Well, there are a lot of things you don't want to hear in life. If you're on a plane and the captain comes over the speaker and says, uh-oh, really that's not what you want to hear when you're flying a plane. Uh-oh. The business manager coming in and saying, we have a problem and we're just starting, but we'd already signed the contract to sell our property. So we had to be out. We had 15 months and we had to be out of our property. So that means we had to build an entire 14-acre campus and we had 15 minutes from scratch to build it in 15 months. And we had to raise millions of dollars in that 15 months. So he came into my office and he said, I think we have a problem. And I said, okay, what is it? He said, I wrote a check for $350,000 to the guy who was going to grade our property. And he just took off to Tahiti with his girlfriend with all of our money and all of 2 other big projects. He took over $3 million from 3 projects and he left the country. And I looked at him and I said, why would you write a check for $350,000 with number 1, never asking me about it? And number 2, why would you write a full check? Well, he needed cost and materials and labor. I said his material was his big graders. I said, we have it written in the contract that you get 50% up front and 50% at the closure. And actually it was 40% at the closure. And we hold back 10% for 6 months to make sure that it was working and it was functioning right. So I said, at best we should, he goes, yeah, he had a sob story. And so now it's my responsibility to stand in front of the deacons and then in front of the church and say right out the gate on a $15 million build, we got snookered for $350,000. I stood in front of the deacons and I said, guys, I have some really bad news, and I'm responsible. I said, I didn't authorize the signing of the check. I didn't know the check had been signed. But I said, I'm responsible because I didn't build guardrails in writing to mandate that the business manager must always come through me or another deacon with any signed check on this project. I then stood in front of an entire congregation of 600 people and said, I am to blame for us being defrauded $350,000. I can't tell you how hard that was, especially since it really wasn't my fault. Fast forward to the end of the project. All kinds of bad stuff was happening, cost overruns, which is very normal. We get to the end of the project, and I now am looking at every penny that is spent in hundreds of sheets of paper on every line item, budgeted out, how much left to go, how much time do we have left. And we were supposed to move in the 1st of August, and the 1st of June, I went into my business manager, and I said, we're burning through $100,000 a month on the electrical side. It was a $1.3 million budget. I said, we're burning through $100,000 on the electrical side every month. And we show we have 2 months left and we only have $17,000 left. How is that? He's like, I don't know. I hadn't noticed it. So we started to go back. I called the general contractor. I said, how is this happening? And the general contractor said, well, we don't show 17,000 left. We show you have 200,000 left. I went back to my business manager. We got on a 3-way call, and then it came out. He was doing the same thing again. The contractor, because everything was collapsing and he had paid for he was paying his guys from his next job. It happens in contracting all the time. And that next job just fell apart. So he'd been taking money from it to pay his guys, and he didn't have enough money to finish the job because he was robbing Paul to pay Peter. And he had a new $100,000 truck and everything else. And what he'd been doing, I'd been going to my business manager and saying, well, the general contractor isn't paying me quickly enough, even though he had 45 days from the end of the month. You had 45 days to pay off. He was never late on, the general contractor was never late. He just wasn't getting paid as fast as he wanted to be paid. And so he went to my business manager and said, hey, I need to be paid every month. And at the same time, he was billing the general contractor. So he was billing 2 people at the same time for the same project. And once again, my business manager was writing a check without telling me. But because I put the guardrails in place a year before, I caught it. We fired him on the spot. Found my chairman of my deacon board, his brother-in-law had a small electrical business. He came in and said, I can finish this job for $17,000, not $200,000. He said, I won't take any payment. We'll just put all the workers on hourly wages. Long story short, we ended up having exactly the right amount of money to finish the electrical on that 1.3 million, 1.4 million, whatever it was, electrical project. Because I had put guardrails in place and I took responsibility, and I caught another guy ripping us off. We do an amazing bit of work to blame other people for our problems. The easiest thing would have been for me to have stood up in front of our church and said it's all the business manager's fault, and it really was. But I refused to do that because ultimately I was the senior pastor. I was the shepherd. I was the overseer of the workforce. I was the president of the assembly. Those are the 3 Greek words that describe my role. And ultimately, that responsibility is mine. When we see this man, Adam, he is 100% different than that. He wasn't going to take any responsibility. The responsibility was all on Eve. And then notice what he says next. The woman whom you gave me. Who's Adam really blaming for the woman? God, if you had just given me a better woman, God, my life would be great. Let me just tell you, men, if you're married, there isn't a better woman. And if you're not married, make sure you make up your mind that she's only going to be the one woman ever. Because if you're married, there isn't a better woman out there. Stop looking at the grass is greener on the other side of the fence. Do any of you know the name Irma Bombeck? Any of you old enough? She wrote that book, The Grass is Always Greener on the Other Side of the Septic Tank. And it's hilarious. If you've never read it, you would enjoy it. My mom loved that book. And the Lord said to the woman, and look, he says, she gave me of the tree and I ate. I'm just this innocent bystander. Notice the passive language. She gave it to me and it just like slipped down my throat. I didn't even know how it happened. All the passive language. You gave me a woman and she deceived me and I'm just standing here innocuously innocent and all of a sudden there's apple in my intestine. Right? And the Lord God said to the woman, what is this you have done? He doesn't ask her why. So why did you do it? Notice what she says. The woman said, the servant did it. Notice her passive language. I was just wandering through the garden and all of a sudden deception came on me. I was doing nothing wrong. And just like Adam, all of a sudden there was an apple in my intestine. I don't even know how it got there. So the Lord God said to the servant, he doesn't even ask the serpent what he did. He says, because you have done this, you are cursed more than all cattle and more than every beast of the field. On your belly you shall go, and you shall eat dust all the days of your life. And notice here is the promise, and I will put enmity between you and the woman. Now, there are some females that like snakes. Not a lot. When I was in first, second grade, we attended Silver State Baptist Schools. Many of you that age know Silver State Baptist Schools. My mom taught over there. And we were growing so fast in third grade, they built these modular units out behind the main buildings. And there was a field next to the modulars. I don't know, Nancy, if you were there, if you remember those modulars, or Heather, were you there? You remember those modulars that were like third grade, second grade. So anyway, some of you don't know, my mom was one of Nancy's students. Nancy was one of my mom's students. Let me get that right. Nancy, you're not that old. All of a sudden I made Nancy 120 years old. So sorry, Nancy, my slip. And so the guys, I don't know what makes guys weird. Women, I'm sorry, but guys are just weird. We do weird things to impress you, like go find snakes in a field at recess and bring them to you and think that's going to be attractive to you. So I didn't like snakes, but I had to be like a guy. I would go out in this field, and they have found those little garter snakes. You know those little garter snakes that are popular in Colorado? And all the boys in my class would go out at recess, so you'd see them tromp into the field, and they would come back with snakes and go, date me. Here, look at me. I'm a big game hunter. Date me. You know, I don't know what they're... I hated snakes, but I didn't want anybody else to know that, so I would protect the women. I mean, guys, keep those snakes away from here. You know, keep the snakes away. I'm protecting all the women. I got more dates than they did. See, you have to think about how to handle third grade dating life, you know. God says that he's going to put enmity between you and the woman. Not a lot of women like snakes. And then he says, and between your seed and her seed. And in good translations, the seed is capitalized. We know from grammar that you capitalize a proper noun. Who is the seed that God is predicting? Who is the seed? Jesus. This is known theologically as the prolegomena. In other words, the first word. Pro means first, pros, first. Legos, lego, is the word for word. In the beginning was the word logos. This is the prolegomena. In other words, this is the first mention of Jesus. Jesus is there at the promise. Jesus at the promise. He shall bruise your head and you shall bruise his heel. Jesus will have a nail put through his heel, won't he? And yet at the cross, Jesus stepped on the head of the snake. And I must hurry. I missed my picture. So let me take you back to the picture. I went too far. I must hurry because I've got two quick more points. So Christ is at the promise, and then Christ is present at the atonement. And I'll go really quick. So fast forward thousands of years, and we get to the Day of Atonement. The Day of Atonement was Aaron shall come into the holy place with the blood of a young bull as an offering and a ram as a burnt offering. And he shall put the holy linen tunic and the linen trousers on his body. He shall be girded with linen sash, and with the linen turban he shall be attired. These are holy garments. Therefore he shall wash his body in water and put them on. This is the Day of Atonement. We call this Yom Kippur. When have the Arabs attacked Israel? October 7th. That was Yom Kippur. This is this celebration. This is not a travel feast. The travel feasts are Pentecost, Passover, and Tabernacles. Those are the three travel feasts. Everybody was supposed to go to Jerusalem. Yom Kippur is not that. Yom Kippur is when the high priest, the chief priest, goes in the Holy of Holies, and the sin for the nation is absolved. This is normally in October. So Yom Kippur 1973 was the closest Israel has ever come to being defeated by an Arab army. Once again, in October 7th was Yom Kippur when Hamas attacked Israel a couple of years ago. That was Yom Kippur. It's their Christmas and New Year's and July 4th all rolled into one. It's their holiest day. Aaron shall offer the bull as a sin offering, which is for himself, and make atonement for himself and his house. He shall take 2 goats and present them before the Lord at the door of the tabernacle, and he shall cast lots for the 2 goats, one lot for the Lord, and the other lot for the scapegoat. This is where we get our term scapegoat, right? And Aaron shall bring the goat on which the Lord's lot fell and offer it as a sin offering. Jesus is both offerings. He is the Day of Atonement. Jesus is there at the atonement in symbolic form. But the goat on which the lot fell to be the scapegoat shall be presented alive before the Lord to make atonement upon it and to let it go as the scapegoat into the wilderness. Jesus becomes our scapegoat because all of our sin is laid on him at the cross. He becomes the one that bears our sin away. But he also becomes the goat that is killed as a sacrifice for our sin. He's there at both Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is about Jesus Christ, and the Day of Atonement is about the day that Jesus takes all of our sin and he dies in our place. Christ is in the Old Testament. And then lastly, we see Christ. So I don't want to read the whole text, but this is the Day of Atonement about Jesus. Isaiah 53, surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. He was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquity. The chastisement for our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. That's Yom Kippur. That's the scapegoat. That was prophesied in Isaiah, and they were doing Yom Kippur. They were doing Day of Atonement every year, and Isaiah says the coming Messiah will be the scapegoat. And they missed it. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He was led as a lamb to the slaughter, and as sheep before a shearers is done, so he opened not his mouth. In other words, he's the other goat who is killed for our sin, and he's the scapegoat who bears the sin away. He opened not his mouth. He was taken from prison and from judgment. In a few months, we are going to stand in Caiaphas' prison in Jerusalem. You stand in Caiaphas' prison, and you are standing where Jesus was imprisoned while the high priest was debating his death. It's a cistern underneath Caiaphas' house. And when you're standing there, you are standing on the very place that Jesus bled as he was beaten. This prophecy is literally fulfilled. He was taken from prison and from judgment, and who will declare his generation? For he was cut off from the land of the living for the transgressions of my people, the scapegoat, bearing the sin of way, and they made his grave with the wicked, but with the rich it is death. So he died. The Messiah is prophesied that he will die with wicked men, but be buried in a rich man's grave. How unrealistic is that? And yet it exactly takes place 600 years after this prophecy. Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him. He has put him to grief. When you make his soul an offering from sin, he shall see his seed. Who is the he? That's God the Father. God the Father shall see who's his seed? You and me. He shall see his seed, he shall prolong his day, and the pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. Do you understand that we're the fulfillment of the prophecy made 600 years before Christ was born about what Christ's death would mean to us? He shall see the labor of his soul and be satisfied. In other words, there will be sufficiency in Christ's death, that God's wrath on man will be satisfied through the death of Jesus Christ. By his knowledge, my righteous servant shall justify many, that's us, for he shall bear their iniquities, that's us. Jesus becomes my scapegoat and my sacrifice. And then lastly, and I know I've preached way too long, Christ is present in the resurrection. He's present at creation, he's present at promise, he's present at atonement, and he's present at the resurrection. This is what they missed. This is what the disciples missed. They saw the glorious Messiah. They didn't see the suffering Messiah or the dead Messiah. This is what they missed. But Psalm said, therefore my heart is glad and my glory rejoices. 1,000 years before Jesus dies and is buried, my flesh will also rest in hope, for you will not leave my soul in Sheol. Who is the my? Whose soul is this? Jesus' soul. This is a prophecy about Jesus. David prophesies 1,000 years before Jesus is born that the Messiah will die. Sheol is the place of the dead. That Messiah will die, but the Messiah will come again. Notice he says, you will not leave my soul in Sheol, nor will you allow your Holy One to see corruption. The Jews believed on day 4, that was the day of corruption. That's why Lazarus being raised on the day 4 is such a miracle. But the prophecy has been that the Messiah will not see corruption. That's why he comes again on the 3rd day. He says, you will show me the path of life. In your presence is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore. Who is sitting at the right hand right now? Jesus. We read about in Acts, on the day of Pentecost, 53 days after the crucifixion, Peter is standing on those steps. And again, in May, I'm going to have our group stand on the steps where Peter preached. You can stand there on the steps where the day of Pentecost takes place. They're still there. They've been uncovered. And on those steps, Peter gives an exegesis of Joel chapter 2, but in that exegesis, he quotes from the passage I just gave you, and he says, for David says concerning him, I foresaw the Lord always before my face, for he is at my right hand, that I may not be shaken. Therefore my heart rejoiced and my tongue was glad. Moreover, my flesh also will rest in hope. We just read that. For you will not leave my soul in Hades, or Sheol. That's the Greek word for the Hebrew word Sheol. Nor will you allow your Holy One to see corruption. You have made known to me the ways of life. You will make me full of joy in your presence. The first message in the Christian era is quoting that Jesus was there at the resurrection. Then in Acts 13, we have another message. Therefore, he also says in another psalm, quoting the psalm we just saw, you will not allow your Holy One to see corruption. For David, after he served in his own generation by the will of God, fell asleep, he died, was buried with his fathers, and saw corruption. That's how you know the Psalms passage isn't talking about David, because David saw corruption, Jesus didn't. We know it's a prophecy. But he who God raised up saw no corruption. You know what that means? Is that if the tomb is empty, and we'll go to an empty tomb. Now, do we know if it was Christ or not? No, we don't. But we will go to an empty tomb in Jerusalem. And you know what? Because that tomb is empty, one day every graveyard full of Christians will also be empty. The great hope of the Christian is that Christ is present at the resurrection.